Mr. Speaker, I think it would be appropriate if the House recognised and remembered the life of Muhammad Ali today. He was not only the greatest in his chosen field, but someone whose courage and wit inspired so many. And indeed, I had the honour of meeting him in London in the 1980s and met his wife Lonnie with Doreen Lawrence only a couple of weeks ago. I think we should commend his bravery in facing Parkinson's disease, his courageous campaigning on civil rights, anti-racism and peace. Truly, all of us have lost one of the greatest. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I met some workers from Sports Direct who were coming to Parliament to give evidence to the Select Committee about the shocking behaviour of that company, non-payment of the minimum wage, a culture of intimidation and fear, on top of the insecurity and exploitation of zero-hours contracts. Philip wrote to me this week on this issue and concerned about it and said the scandalous scourge of zero-hours contracts, which is blighting the lives of many already low-paid people. So will the Prime Minister do what some other European countries have done and ban exploitative zero-hours contracts here?
First of all, let me join the Leader of the Opposition in paying tribute to the life of Muhammad Ali. He was a hero in the ring. He was an enormous role model outside the ring. And what he did in terms of breaking down barriers and encouraging integration, I think is something we should all celebrate. And I'm sure, standing at this dispatch box, I'm sure we all tried to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, although that's not always possible in the circumstances that we face. On the issue of Sports Direct and the appalling practice of not paying the minimum wage, I absolutely abhor it, and this government has done more than any previous government to crack down on the non-payment. We've levied almost 5,000 penalties since 2010. We continue to name and shame eligible employees when the investigation has been closed, something that didn't happen before. On the issue of zero-hours contracts, we legislated in the last Parliament to stop exclusive zero-hours contracts, but we followed the conclusions of our consultation that said that we shouldn't go further than that, and that for some people, they want to have the choice of those contracts.
The case of Sports Direct shows that Mike Ashley certainly isn't a Father Christmas. Indeed, he'd make Scrooge look like a good employer. And I think we should commend Unite the Union and its members for exposing what went on. And it shows that we must strengthen, not weaken, workers' rights, particularly where there's criminal activities involved. But his government's employment minister, the honourable member for Whittam, said that if we leave Europe, we could just halve the burdens of the European Union social and employment legislation. So perhaps the Prime Minister could help us. Does she speak on behalf of the government when she promises to reduce the burdens, as she describes them, of employment legislation? Or on behalf of whom does she speak?
The government is in favour of staying in a reformed European Union because we are stronger, we are safer, and we're better off. And for many people, one of the reasons they'll want to stay in the European Union is that they do believe it provides an underpinning in terms of rights for workers and employment rights. I would make the point, in addition, that we in this House have repeatedly chosen to go over and above those rights. So we've got the right to request flexible working for all workers since 2014. We went well beyond the maternity leave EU directive, giving 52 weeks maternity leave. We've given shared parental leave. We give 8 days more annual leave for full-time workers than the EU Working Time Directive. I believe that this modern, compassionate Conservative government has an excellent record on these things, underpinned by our membership of the European Union.
If it is a modern, compassionate Conservative government, as he describes it, why does it have an employment minister who wants to reduce the burdens, as she describes them, of employment legislation and make work less secure? And could I quote one other person who's given some opinions on these matters, and I quote him. He says, "I can't guarantee every person currently in their current job will keep their job." That was the member for Surrey Heath, who is the Justice Minister, who seems equally relaxed about unemployment and employment rights. So he has an Employment Minister and a Justice Minister who want to reduce what they describe as workers' protection as a burden. Can't he do something about that?
There are ministers in the government who, in a personal capacity, are campaigning on another side of the argument. Now, I don't agree with them. This is one occasion when the business, large and small, and the trade unions are on the same side. I think we should celebrate that and get out and campaign as hard as we can.
Mr. Speaker, what I do celebrate is the work done by trade unions all across Europe that persuaded the European Union to bring in 4 weeks paid holiday, laws against sex discrimination, rights for part-time workers, rights for agency workers. But, Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago I raised with the Prime Minister the proposed amendment to the Posting of Workers Directive to close a loophole that allows unscrupulous employers to exploit migrant workers and undercut wages here. Will he now reply to my question and confirm that he will argue in Europe for that amendment to close this loophole that allows this exploitation to go on?
As I think I said last time, we support the current draft. We want to see this sorted out. We've been working with the Dutch Prime Minister who's leading this work, and we think that an amendment to this would be worthwhile. The current draft is good and we'd back it.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I'm very pleased that he's backing it, but I hope he backs it to ensure that it goes through. But there is another issue that I raised with him a couple of weeks ago, and that is the anger that exists all over this country, indeed all over the Western world, about tax avoidance. I agree that we're more likely to make progress inside the European Union than outside on tax avoidance, but his members of the European Parliament have not been supporting country-by-country tax transparency that would force companies to publish their tax payments in each country in which they operate. Will he now tell us when this is going to be supported by his MEPs, when it will go through to close down just one of the many tax loopholes that exist at the present time?
Well, first of all, I would argue that no government has done more nationally to crack down on tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance. And I would also argue that no government has done more internationally to bring this up the international agenda. I made it the centrepiece of my G8. We've driven change in the OECD. We're now driving change in the European Union. And let me confirm, my MEPs do support country-by-country reporting, and they have said that over and over again, and I'm happy to repeat that again today.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm really pleased that his MEPs support it. We're all delighted about that. I just hope they get round to voting for it when the opportunity comes up, because that would certainly help. He will be aware, Mr. Speaker, that the Labour position is that we want to stay in the European Union to improve workers' rights, tackle exploitation, drive down tax evasion and tax avoidance. But we are concerned that these issues are not the priorities of members of his government and his party, such as the member for Uxbridge, the member for Surrey Heath and the member for Whittam. They are speaking to try and destroy any of the social advances made within the European Union. Does he talk to them about this at any time? And do they speak for themselves or him and his government? And if they speak for themselves, how are they ministers at the same time?
Prime Minister.
And here I am trying to be so consensual. I'm doing my best. I could, of course, mention that the honourable member for Edgbaston was out yesterday spinning for Nigel Farage. So we could always... but I don't want to play that game. I want to stress the unity of purpose there is, particularly over this issue of tax evasion, because there's a serious point here. What we have in prospect in the European Union, in part because of British action, is the idea of saying that if large foreign multinationals want to invest in the European Union, they will have to report their country-by-country tax arrangements, not just in Europe, but all over the world. Now, that could drive a huge change in some of these very large companies where there are great concerns. And I hope that he and I can unite and say this would be a good thing and shows that when Britain pushes an agenda in Europe, it wins, and it wins for our citizens.